Americans safe. They've done a very good job. If the reporting is accurate, in one fell swoop, the president could have unsettled our allies, emboldened our adversaries, endangered our military and intelligence officers world over, and exposed our nation to greater risk. Given the gravity of the matter, we need to be able to quickly assess whether or not this report is true and what exactly was said. So, I am calling on the White House to make the transcript of the meeting with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador available to the Congressional Intelligence Committees as soon as possible. The White House should make the transcript of the meeting available immediately to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. And if the president has nothing to hide, he should direct that the transcript of the meeting be made available. The members who sit on those committees have the necessary clearances to review the transcript and any related summary of the president's meeting with the Russians. I agree with the senior senator from Maine that this briefing should happen immediately. Those committees would be able to help establish the facts before we grapple with the potential consequences. Last night, the administration issued several overlapping denials. Some questioned the overall veracity of the account. Some took pains to specifically deny certain accusations, but others did not. This morning, the president tweeted a version of events that undercut his advisors' carefully worded denials and seems to confirm that the reports that he had shared the information in question. Following so closely after Mr. Comey's firing, which was rationalized to the press and the American public in several different ways over the course of a week, this administration now faces a crisis of credibility. The president has told us that we cannot take at face value the explanation of some of his key advisors, but the events of the past week have taken this to an untenable extreme. Their timelines and rationales in the administration contradict one another. The truth, as it were, sits atop shifting sands in this administration. We need the transcripts to see exactly what the president said, given the conflicting reports from the people in the room. Producing the transcripts is the only way for this administration to categorically prove the reports untrue. Mr. President, there's a crisis of credibility in this administration, which will hurt us in ways almost too numerous to elaborate. At the top of the list are an erosion of trust in the presidency and trust in America by our friends and allies. The president owes the intelligence community, the American people, and the Congress a full explanation. The transcripts, in my view, are a necessary first step. Until the administration provides the unedited transcript, until the administration fully explains the facts of this case, the American people will rightly doubt if their president can handle our nation's most closely kept secrets.
Whip.
Mr. President, as I noted yesterday, this week we celebrate National Police Week, and in particular recognize and remember those law enforcement officers who have paid the ultimate price and have sacrificed their lives to protect the communities in which they serve. Yesterday I had the chance to speak about Javier Vega Jr., a Border Patrol agent who served in South Texas and was tragically killed by two illegal immigrant criminals. Today I want to talk about the attack on law enforcement officers in Dallas almost a year ago. Last July, about 800 people had gathered in downtown Dallas for a peaceful march. Given the size of the event, dozens of law enforcement officers were on hand to protect the protesters so they could exercise their fundamental constitutional right. Before 9 p.m., the event had been going very well by any standard. There wasn't any violence reported in the crowd, even though some similar events across the country hadn't been as calm. But in Dallas, it was clear that there existed a mutual respect between the citizens protesting and law enforcement. There were even social media posts of protesters embracing police officers in a show of solidarity and friendship. Unfortunately, the night would soon be robbed of any enduring image of that sort of positive scene. A man, someone who came that night explicitly to target law enforcement officers, opened fire, killing 5 officers and wounding 7 more. The deadliest day for American law enforcement since 9/11. The officers who lost their lives that day, Brent Thompson, Patrick Zamaripa, Lauren Aherns, Michael Kroll, and Michael Smith, will not be forgotten. They, like the other officers on duty that night, many of whom were injured by the gunman, didn't look the other way or run the other way when the violence erupted. Like the heroes they are, they ran to the danger, not away from the gunshots and the uproar. They, like law enforcement officers across the country, weren't about to shy away from doing their job, even if that meant putting their own lives on the line. So today I want to commend the men and women of the Dallas Police Force, a group of men and women with incredible courage and unflinching valor in the face of danger. This police week, I'm particularly grateful to them and to the officers and first responders all over the state of Texas and all around our nation who count the costs and choose to serve their communities day after day, often with little thanks or recognition. As I said last summer, it shouldn't take an event of this scale to jolt our consciences. As legislators, we have tremendous opportunities to better support our men and women in blue who risk their lives to protect ours. And we have a duty to do all we can to keep them safe and to keep our society safe and peaceful. So as we celebrate Police Week, I hope we can each do our part to better support the men and women serving in law enforcement. Later today, I plan to introduce a piece of legislation called the Back the Blue Act, along with Senator Cruz and Senator Tillis. This is legislation that makes clear our support for these public servants who spend their lives protecting us and serving us. The Back the Blue Act would create a new federal crime for killing or attempting to kill an enforcement officer or a federally funded public safety officer. It would create a new crime for assaulting a law enforcement officer as well. Mr. President, there is no justification, none at all, for attacking a police officer. It is an act of anarchy to attack the very people who help keep our society safe and protected. We need to show that we value their lives, and we need to make it absolutely clear that we will hold those who carry out crimes against our police officers accountable. The Back the Blue Act sends that message loud and clear. I think it's important to point out that this legislation would also help make our communities stronger by allowing grant funds to be used for efforts to help foster more trust between police and the communities that they protect. This bill would better serve the men and women who work tirelessly in our communities every day. So I would hope our colleagues would join me in supporting it. We can do more to protect and support our law enforcement officers, and we can start with the Back the Blue Act to do just exactly that. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Good morning.
Mr. President, before I begin my remarks, I would like to commemorate National Police Week and the lives and sacrifices of two extraordinary Massachusetts law enforcement officers who fell in 2016. Thomas Clardy, a trooper with the Massachusetts State Police, and Ronald Tarantino, a police officer with the Auburn Police Department. Their names will be inscribed on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial here in Washington, D.C., in honor of their service. By the end of this year, more than 21,000 names will be on that wall. We will never forget their service and sacrifice to our communities and to our country. And with the help of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, we pledge to their families and loved ones that they will have the support and resources which they need. I rise to speak about President Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey. In and of itself, this action by President Trump is seismic and has shaken the very foundation of our government, and I dare say our democracy. But just yesterday, the American people were also once again confronted by presidential actions that raised both alarm and the need for investigation. In a news story, the Washington Post reported that President Trump revealed highly sensitive classified material to senior Russian officials during a meeting last week. According to the Post story, President Trump reportedly revealed information about ISIS that could compromise a partner country's key intelligence sources and enable Russia to, according to the story, identify our sources and techniques. For gathering intelligence, there could be no greater compromise of American security. The information that President Trump revealed was so sensitive that the United States had previously refrained from sharing it even with our allies. President Trump's decision to relay some of our most sensitive intelligence with representatives of the Russian government betrays an astounding lack of judgment. By revealing what is called code word information to Russia, President Trump may have compromised key intelligence sources, endangered the fight against ISIS, and undermined the trust of our international partners. While the president may have the authority to declassify U.S. intelligence, it is imperative to the safety of our military and intelligence personnel and those of our partners that he do so through a careful and deliberative process. There is no evidence that Donald Trump did that. Congress must immediately investigate this irresponsible action and take steps to ensure that President Trump does no additional damage to U.S. national security in his dealings with Russia. This dangerous behavior comes on the heels of the president's reckless decision to fire former FBI Director James Comey, pushing our country ever closer to a constitutional crisis. President Trump's firing of Mr. Comey is disturbingly reminiscent of Watergate's Saturday Night Massacre, when our Constitution was last subject to an executive branch-induced stress test. Then President Nixon fired independent prosecutor Archibald Cox, who was leading the investigation into the Watergate scandal and the Nixon campaign's involvement in it. Now, President Trump has fired his FBI director, who was leading the investigation into the Russian interference scandal and the Trump campaign's involvement in it. Mark Twain is purported to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. Unfortunately, there is no humor in President Trump's actions. At first, we were supposed to believe that the president fired Director Comey because of the way he handled the investigation of Hillary Clinton's email server, which was unfair to her. That was what President Trump sent his staff out to tell the press and the American people. The official White House statement from Press Secretary Sean Spicer on May 9th said that President Trump acted based on the clear recommendation of both Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. That was a reference to the now infamous memorandum for by Attorney General Sessions, prepared by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, which cited Comey's, quote, handling of the conclusion of the investigation of Secretary Clinton's emails as the reason why the public purportedly had lost confidence in the FBI, and on which Attorney General Sessions based his recommendation to the president that he fire Mr. Comey. On May 9th, Counselor to the President Kellyanne Conway said that President Trump, quote, took the recommendation of his Deputy Attorney General who oversees the FBI. Then, on May 10th, Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the president, quote, took the recommendation seriously and he made a decision based on that. Even Vice President Pence said that President Trump's decision to fire Comey was based on the Rosenstein memo. So the American people were being told to believe that President Trump took the unprecedented step of firing the FBI director in the midst of an investigation of the Trump campaign because James Comey was too hard on Hillary Clinton. That simply didn't pass the laugh test. Who can forget that candidate Trump repeatedly called her crooked Hillary Clinton throughout the campaign? Who can forget that candidate Trump applauded Director Comey for the way he handled the Clinton investigation? At the end of October of 2016, just days before the election, and after Comey had reopened the Clinton email investigation, Trump said that Comey had, quote, guts and had brought back his reputation. But it took only one day after Mr. Comey's firing for President Trump to himself admit that reason was utterly, utterly false. In an interview, President Trump said that Rosenstein made a recommendation, but regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey knowing that there was no good time to do it. So much for the Rosenstein memo. So much for the White House press statement. So much for what Kellyanne Conway said. So much for the words of the Vice President of the United States. And if that admission wasn't enough, President Trump went on to tell everyone what was on his mind when he made that decision. Here's his quote. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won. President Trump's statements about the Russia investigation are, of course, untrue. There's nothing made up about the conclusions of the intelligence community that Russia interfered with our election. The allegations of the Trump campaign's collusion with the Russians are serious. That's why the FBI and the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have been investigating them. So contrary to what the White House senior administration officials and the president, in fact, admitted that he fired the director of the FBI precisely because he was overseeing an investigation of the Trump campaign and its ties to Russia. And according to all of these various reports, the president did so just after Director Comey had gone to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and asked for more resources for the Russia investigation. The firing of James Comey now brings the number of law enforcement officials who were investigating the Trump campaign or his administration when they themselves were fired to 3. First, Manhattan U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, and now Director Comey. President Trump himself, in his termination letter to Comey, not only made no mention of the Clinton email investigation, but instead expressly linked the firing to the Russian investigation. Trump claimed that he fired Comey despite Comey having informed the president on 3 separate occasions that he was not under investigation, a claim that has not been substantiated. Here is the plain and simple truth. President Trump feared that the FBI investigation into his campaign's possible collusion with Russia was getting too close for comfort, so he fired Director Comey. Comey's firing could be nothing less than obstruction of justice, masquerading as a personnel action. It's what impeding a federal investigation looks like. It's what an assault on the rule of law looks like. If there is one lesson that President Trump should have learned from Watergate, it is this. If you're under investigation, don't fire the investigator. But as disturbing as Mr. Comey's firing is, it gets worse. Days after President Trump tweeted a veiled threat, one that smacked of witness intimidation, here's the quote: "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press." Are there recordings? We don't know yet. But if there are, the White House and Justice Department must ensure that they are preserved. It's clear that President Trump did not learn any of the lessons of Watergate, which only underscores the need for a special prosecutor independent of the White House and Justice Department to get to the bottom of this. The role of a special independent prosecutor is to follow all the facts wherever they lead, and that individual needs to be as far away from the White House as possible. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein should not be the one to appoint a special prosecutor. Just 3 weeks on the job, Mr. Rosenstein is now compromised by the questions swirling around his role in the Comey firing. Did Comey meet with Rosenstein and ask for more resources for the Russia investigation? Why did Rosenstein discuss the removal of Director Comey with Attorney General Sessions after Sessions had recused himself from the Russia investigation? And why didn't Rosenstein question Sessions' involvement? The magnitude of the decision to appoint a special counsel in these circumstances cannot be made by a political appointee. Instead, I join Minority Leader Schumer's call that the appointment must be made by the highest-ranking career civil servant in the Justice Department, someone insulated from politics and the White House. And until we have an independent special prosecutor appointed, we should not move forward with the confirmation of any replacement for James Comey as director of the FBI. Additionally, Director Comey should come and testify before Congress, which both Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Burr and Vice Chairman Warner have already requested, clearly showing the bipartisan support for this. There are too many unanswered questions that only Director Comey can answer. And finally, while it has been announced that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein will brief all senators and answer their questions, we must still hear from Attorney General Sessions. We must not lose sight of the fact that a foreign power interfered in our last presidential election and that the Trump campaign may have colluded with it to win the White House. This strikes at the heart of our government and our very democracy. Our elections must be fair and free of foreign interference. It is time for both Democrats and Republicans to put love of country ahead of party, to come together and demand the appointment of a special prosecutor who will investigate and follow the facts no matter where they lead. And I would like to conclude my remarks today by expressing my opposition to the nomination of Jeffrey Rosen to be Deputy Secretary of Transportation. Mr. Rosen has a long history, both in government and in the private sector, of defending private industry against regulations designed to protect the American public. When he first worked for the Department of Transportation, he touted the fact that he was involved in ending or withdrawing 180 potential transportation department rulemakings. He has also been hostile to environmental regulations designed to protect our air and water. He has opposed greenhouse gas emissions regulations in his role at the Office of Management and Budget, and personally represented the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in attempting to undermine climate change science in order to fend off potential regulations. Mr. Rosen's firm represented the Alliance for the Automobile Manufacturers and other auto groups against California overrules meant to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase non-polluting vehicles. I will vote no on Mr. Rosen's nomination because our automobile safety, environment, and clean energy future is just too important, and I urge my colleagues to join me. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last week the American people were stunned by what we learned happened in the White House. We saw an alarming set of developments about how this president is handling the investigation into Russia's interference with our democracy. Last Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard testimony from Sally Yates, who President Trump had asked to serve as acting Attorney General when he was first sworn into office. Ms. Yates testified that soon after the inauguration, she twice visited White House counsel Don McGahn to warn him about National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. She warned that General Flynn had been compromised by his secret communications with Russian Ambassador Kislyak and that General Flynn could be blackmailed. Ms. Yates first visited the White House counsel McGahn on January 26. McGahn invited her back to ask follow-up questions the following day on January 27. Those follow-ups included questions about General Flynn's potential criminal exposure. What else happened on January 27th? The President of the United States brought in FBI Director James Comey for a one-on-one dinner where he reportedly asked Director Comey for a pledge of loyalty. Is the timing of this Comey dinner curious? You bet it is. According to Press Secretary Sean Spicer, President Trump was briefed immediately by White House counsel McGahn after Ms. Yates' warning. That means the president knew about the Justice Department's concerns with Flynn when he met Director Comey for dinner. Was the president's request for loyalty from Director Comey an attempt to impede the Justice Department's investigation into General Flynn? Was it an effort by the president to inoculating himself from Russian-related investigations? These are unanswered questions. But when Director Comey reportedly refused to swear his loyalty to President Trump, he apparently sealed his fate as director of the FBI. Last Tuesday evening, President Trump fired Director Comey while Comey was giving a speech to FBI agents in Los Angeles. The reason? Well, on Thursday, the president made clear that the Russian investigation was on his mind when he fired Director Comey. He said to Lester Holt of NBC, and I quote, "When I decided to do it, I said to myself, you know, this Russian thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story," end of quote. President Trump later said that the Russia investigation was, quote, "should be over with, in my opinion. Should have been over a long time ago," end of quote. Then on Friday, the president found time to threaten Mr. Comey on Twitter, implying that he had taped their conversations and that he would release the tapes if Comey disclosed what he knew. Let's be clear, the president is in dangerous territory here. What the president is doing when it comes to potential obstruction of justice is similar to a chapter in history many of us remember. President Nixon, on October 20th, 1973, fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox when his Watergate investigation got too close to the White House. That sparked a constitutional crisis in America. And now we've learned that President Trump has disclosed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and that same Ambassador Kislyak.